three are the same argument?
No, of course not.
Okay, right? Then if I come to him and say, the basis on which I believe that the next one will be white is because of an inductive argument, which one of these arguments do you think I'm talking about?
Well, it's not. You're not really making any sort of deduction. At least not in the way you expressed it. So none of them?
It's the second one. It's the second one. I mean, I don't...
But the second one is deductive,
The second one is the second one is not deductive. Right? The second one's the only one of these that's not deductive. Because the premise doesn't necessitate the conclusion. Right? It's not valid.
Well, I was just taking it to be formulated in sort of a deductive way. That's all. That's all I'm talking about. But
no, look, do you see the three of them, or like, are you looking at them, or are you driving or something?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, 1 and 3 are valid, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and 2 is not.
Yeah.
Right. So if I say I believe the conclusion and my reason for it, right, or my argument for it is the second argument, right? Why would you ask me to defend the other two arguments? Or one of the other? Why would you ask me to defend the third argument? That's a different argument.
I don't see how that's a problem, first of all. Second of all, I don't like.
What do you mean you don't see how it's a problem?
Presumably, well, just hold on, okay? I don't think somebody making the inductive inference would say the second argument accurately characterizes my position, right? Because that is formulated deductively. It's not deductively valid. But for you to say it's not deductively valid, that just requires that it's formulated in a deductive way, right?
Are you just saying it's formulated deductively because I wrote it down? I don't understand, because I numbered the premise and put a C. Like, what about that makes it deductive?
Well, no, you said. Well, also you said it's not valid, right? And validity is a property of formal arguments.
If you were interpreting it or trying to read it as if it were a deductive argument, right, then you would say it's an invalid deductive argument or something like that, right? That's fine.
Yeah, okay.
And that's okay, right? But the point is that he's saying I won't accept invalid arguments, right? And all the inductive ones are invalid.
Well, no, okay, not that. The third one is not invalid. I mean, and now I can kind of get back to. What do you mean? Is that just to say it's not ampliative?
It's exactly.
I just don't see. Now I can circle back because I don't see how that's a problem. Like, sure, one's ampliative, the other's not, but that doesn't mean the same reasons that you defend the ampliative inference can't be applied to the non-ampliative inference.
That's irrelevant. Well, first of all,
but
that's not usually going to be the case.
Some kind of problem, right?
Usually that's not going to be the case, that the reasons would be the same, right? Because you're actually defending something different. Now, it could be the case that the same reasons... Well, I didn't say the reasons
would be the same.
Hold on. You did just... I didn't say you said they would be the same. You said they could be the same, right?
Well, no, I said the reasons... I said the reasons for defending the ampliative one could also work for defending the non-ampliative one. But that's not to say there aren't reasons that you could defend the non-ampliative one that wouldn't apply to the ampliative one.
Look,
so it was kind of a nitpick, but
it could be the case that for some arguments, right, you would adduce the same reasons in defense of the deductive and the inductive versions of it. That's fine, right? But the point is that it's not the same inference, right? Like, you're asking me to defend something. Like, the point... So, do you understand why, like, the third argument is non-ampliative?
Yeah, of course.
Right. So, the point is that all the information that's in the conclusion is already contained in the premises, right? Like, if I represented the premises as a single-line conjunction, right, the conclusion is literally just... It's equivalent to an expression where the conclusion is one of the conjuncts for any valid argument.
Are you just saying that it's valid?
That's what valid means. Yeah, all the valid arguments have that property. Yeah.
It's not quite equivalent, but sure. I mean, I get what you're trying to say.
Exactly. It's equivalent if it's a single line, right? So.
No, because Q could be true and P could be false, and that's not equivalent to the conjunction of P1 and P2. But either way.
No, that's not what I'm saying, right? That wasn't what I said. So,
well, you said,
for example, so here's an example of what I'm saying, right? So that you understand, right? I said if you represent the conjunction of the premises as a single line conjunction, right, then that expression is equivalent to a conjunction where the conclusion is one of the conjuncts right?
Oh,
So it's
if you
like
said
saying,
that, yeah.
so it's like saying premise one, P and Q, therefore Q. It's like saying that.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I may have misheard you, but yeah, that's obviously right.
Right. So yeah. So you could take modus ponens and you could say if P and Q and P, right? And then that's equivalent to P and Q, right?
Yeah.
So if you
Okay.
took the two premises of that argument, represented it as a single line, right? It would be like saying P and Q, therefore Q. So the
Yeah,
only
it's
reason that we're even
deductively
bringing them
valid.
up is sort of for utility, so we can kind of like isolate them and defend them separately, right? And so the point is that when I make this inductive inference, right, I'm not trying to defend that material conditional, right?
Well, maybe you're not necessarily trying to defend it, but I just don't see what the problem is.
I mean, look, I've tried to explain what it is.
No, I listen.
No.
I hear you. You're saying like one is impletive, the other is not. Like they're not the same inference because of that.
That's just like a
Stuff like
really that's
that.
like a really direct way of saying what the problem is, right? Like I've unpacked it further from that, right? But like that's a very direct way of saying, hey, look,
Well,
I'm giving you an ampliative inference. This is why I believe this, but it's ampliative. And you say, no, 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 I won't accept that. I'll only accept a non-ampliative inference, and you have to defend that, right?
yeah. I don't see what the problem with that is. Like, yeah, I've heard you say that. I just don't see the problem yet.
I mean, look, the point is that we believe all kinds of things on the basis of induction, right? It's not like ask yourself is holding a bunch of unjustified beliefs that like his cereal will go in, or sorry, his milk will go in the cereal bowl when he tries to pour it. You know, like, like almost, the majority of science is based on induction and abduction, right? Scientific inferences are not, typically speaking, deductive inferences, right? Most of the kinds of predictions that we make are not deductive inferences. We're not ever saying like, yeah, we think it's true that if all the past cases of swans have been white, like then it follows, right, that the next one will be white. We know that doesn't follow, right? We already
Okay.
know that.
Is maybe I can just ask this directly. Is there something you think you're losing when you go from ampliative to non-ampliative, besides just the fact that it's not
Yeah,
ampliative
look,
anymore?
yeah, look. If ask yourself goes like, here, I give him the argument number two, right? I give him the second argument, and he says, no, I want you to defend the third argument, and I go, okay, and he says, well, what's your justification for premise one, right? And I go, well, I actually don't really think that, you know, I can't defend the strict conditional, right? I can't defend a conceptual entailment or like an analytic. I can't really defend that, in the sort of counterfactual, like natural language sense that it follows, like that the consequent follows from the antecedent. I can't do that either, right? So the only way I can argue for premise one is, I can argue for premise two, right? But then the only way for me to defend premise one is to just give you a different argument for the conclusion, you know?
I mean, it just seems to me like all the same sort of reasons you could give for why you would accept the ampliative inference would also apply to accepting P1 of the deductive argument. So I just don't
Right.
see
So, like, so look,
what you're
this is
losing.
why the first argument will probably clear this up, right? Because we didn't really talk about that one, right? And that one I tried to spell it out, right? Because it's almost like if you really wanted to embed the sort of like epistemic context stuff as well into the syllogism, right? To make it like really, really, really clear what we're saying, right? You say, okay, the principles of induction are true, premise one, right? And you want to go with premise one. Okay, that's true. Okay. Well, if that's true, then if all the past cases of swans have been white, then the next swan will be white. Well, look, the principles of induction don't think that that's true either, right? So like that also is totally unhelpful and like doesn't work, right? That's also not the same inference, right? Because how am I going to defend premise two? Like we know that's
Well,
wrong. Right?
I don't think the first argument is like really useful in any kind of way. So I would just say like ignore the first argument. But again, I just don't see, like I said, it seems like any reason you could give for why you would accept the ampliative inference would apply to accepting P1 of the third argument. So I don't see what it means to say like you're losing some weird thing when you go from ampliative to non-ampliative besides just the fact that it's not ampliative anymore.
So okay. So the point is, right? Like when we
Wait, sorry.
say
Before you go, I actually have to mute now because I have to get back. But you can say what you're about to say, and I'll listen to it.
yeah, we can pick it back up too at some point. But okay, yeah. Okay. So what is being changed if you ask me to defend the first premise of the third argument? Right. Well, again, right. Like the point is that when I gave you the initial inductive inference, right? Now you might say, okay, how are you going to defend the inductive inference if I just let you have that? Okay. Well, we could appeal to the principles of induction. Right? I have no issue with that. I think that's right, and say, okay, well, we know that the conclusion of this argument doesn't follow, right? We know that the premise of the argument could be true and the conclusion could be false, right? And so when we accept the principles of induction, that's what we're accepting, right? Now, there may be other principles associated with how you distinguish a good inductive inference from a bad one, and that's a little bit more hazy, right? Obviously, and maybe that's why Ask Yourself is like opposed to this because it's too nuanced, But like there is a fairly there are criteria that are pretty well established in different academic fields for what a good inductive inference is, you know. Um, and so the point is that like we're always accepting there that like we know that the conclusion is not necessitated by the premises, right? And so now if you accepted that, then like we're all good. But if you want to say like no, I generally don't accept the principles of induction. I only accept inferences where the premises necessitate their conclusions. First of all, you're asking me to defend a different inference, right? Again, right? And I've pointed out like several of the property differences, so like they are different inferences, right? And so it's untoward in a dialectic for you to ask me to do that when I'm not telling you that my claim depends. But I'm claiming I can. That's one thing. And then the second thing is that if you really stick to that and you like reject that principle, that there are some inferences that we will accept where the premises don't necessitate the conclusion, then you're just going to be like shit out of luck when it comes to like accepting almost any science, right? Or like day-to-day reasoning, like I pointed out, like the milk in the cereal bowl, or like when I put on my pants, the earth won't explode, right? You're not justified in any of those kinds of inferences, like so. That's why I'm saying it's like wacky.
I think all the day-to-day stuff or the scientific stuff. Look, he's just not like. I mean, he's just not gonna grant that. Like, either he might. There's two stories you can tell here. Like, one, he might think that there's something going on with like epistemic context where, these things can be acceptable for certain reasons, even though they will cash out in some way, shape, or form into the inference that he likes. Or he just believes that like, under how he understands those terms related to induction, they're just compatible with deduction.
Look, mate, like if he wants to employ the notion of like epistemic context here, right, and just say like the epistemic context is that I'm demanding you give me a deductive inference when you said that you believed this on the basis of an inductive inference. That's your epistemic context now, buddy. Right?
Yeah, that's not
what that means. Like that's not what epistemic context means. You don't get to use.
No, that's mischaracterizing what the epistemic context is.
Oh, okay. Well, what is the epistemic context in which I'm not?
Yeah, so he's just saying there. So suppose you have a context where you just kind of input various things that we might consider inductive principles. We just input various of those into starting set. And then let's say like people are kind of making these kind of ordinary half-baked inferences that aren't, containing an inductive step. We could just know that if we have that in starting set, then there's a way of making those inferences intelligible. And there's a way of easily paraphrasing those inferences into the desirable ones. And so that reasoning is still preserved.
I think you're missing the point. Kind of sad.
Sorry, what's the point that's being missed?
Oh, it's like the entirety of everything I said. Like if you accept the principles of induction, right? That just means that you're willing to accept arguments where the conclusion isn't necessitated by the principle. Right? That's what it means to accept the principles of induction.
Look, he just means if you have some understanding of induction, where induction and deduction aren't compatible. I didn't say it was idiosyncratic. I said if you have some understanding where they aren't compatible. What's going on is that you and a y are using terms in different ways.
You can say that about anything. You understand?
I don't understand. I agree. It's possible that, yeah, I agree with that.
Right
I don't.
now, you and I aren't disagreeing. We're just using terms differently.
Do you think I disagree that you can? Do you think I disagree that you can say that? No, I don't disagree that you can say that. I just don't believe that that's plausible.
I can't say that.
Right, but I agree. I don't disagree. No, I agree. I agree. You can say that. I don't believe that that's plausible. I believe in the AY case that it is plausible. I do believe that you guys are just using terms differently. And so, look,
like I just talked to you for like a half an hour about how
I heard what you said, but nothing.
Very implausible that he's just using the term in a completely idiosyncratic way, as opposed to him just being confused about the differences between induction and deduction.
Okay, well, there's a few things here. Let's think about it. So, maybe whether they're idiosyncratic or not, I'm actually not totally sure about that. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But it could just be the case that he wants to maybe just take some broad notion of what induction is and kind of conceptually engineer one that's more useful towards, certain goals. Like maybe he's like engineering a new concept of induction. Maybe it's like loosely connected to a general one people might have. And even if it is idiosyncratic in some sense, maybe it's not like the technical one a philosopher might give. It doesn't matter. The main point is, like, okay, look, you'd agree. Look, the point is that maybe you don't agree that you guys are using terms differently. I think you are.
Any independent motivation for that at all?
I mean, well, I just have...
You have a single shred of independent motivation for that. Now, here's the independent motivation for the he's just confused theory, right? He's been confused before. You deny that?
I mean, everybody, like when he was like 5 years old, I mean, I'm sure everybody has.
No, I mean, like, have you never heard him express confusion before?
I mean, look, it depends what you mean, but I don't really. I mean, we can go into it later. But the point
what I mean by have you heard him express confusion before? Now,
no, I said it depends. It depends which. It depends which. It depends which incident you're talking about.
Monkey boy.
I think there's. I mean, there's one time maybe, but I'm not sure if I'd even call that confusion.
I said, have you ever heard him express confusion? Like, say, I'm confused. Have you ever heard him say that?
Oh yeah, sure, of course. Like when people say things like there are stance-independent normative facts, and he'll be like, that language confuses me. Yeah, of course.
There you go. So what's more likely that he's engineered a new meaning for induction that he hasn't told anyone about, right? He's just freely using the term as if that's not what he's done.
What do you mean he hasn't told anyone? Like if you actually look at his server, he'll say that various times that he believes that induction and deduction are compatible. And if he takes that view, and I just have like general, if I just have some sort of, yeah, they're compatible. All it means that there's no contradiction entailed by saying that an inductive inference is represented as a deductive inference, right? Where it's valid, of course. And just having general confidence about somebody's reasoning ability, or general confidence about somebody's sensitivity to making errors. I just don't think that. I just think that you guys are having a verbal dispute in light of that.
Do you think when he says that, right? When he says that he thinks that induction and deduction are the same in some sense, or translatable, right? Do you think that he's using an idiosyncratic meaning of induction, or do you think he's talking about what other people have been saying to him? Right? Do you think that he's just saying, I made up a new idea, right? And I'm saying it's the same thing as deduction? Is that what you think he's saying?
I don't think I even understand your question. That was I'm not sure. Can you make it more clear?
My question. Listen,
because you kind of you started off asking a question, then you kind of talked for a bit, and then you went back to laughing. Then you asked. I didn't really hear it.
You're saying that he's conceptually engineered a notion of induction that differs, from the normative or typical usage in philosophy. You're saying that, right? So I want to know if you think that's what he's
something
done
like that. I suspect.
Before he said.
Wait, did you want me to answer it?
No. Look, I'm not done. Right?
Okay. I thought you were asking a question.
Do you think he did that and then, decided to say that, hey, induction, i.e. this concept that I've engineered, is the same thing as deduction? Or do you think that he was talking about what other people...
He didn't say it's the same thing as deduction.
It's translatable, okay? Or whatever.
Okay, yeah. So
they're basically equivalent or could be expressed interchangeably.
Yeah, they could be expressed in, yeah. So here's what I suspect. in some sense, I suspect either, well, that's one thing. Either yes, in the sense that when I say engineered, I'm saying he thinks that there's some general concept of
Why would you
induction.
think he doesn't think?
I don't know. I don't know why. Wait, I don't know why you're interrupting. Maybe he thinks that there's some general. Maybe he doesn't even think that the concept of induction is consistently applied in philosophy. Maybe he thinks that there's a load of different ways people talk about the terms, and he takes that sort of general. There's some general similarities with how people talk about induction or inductive reasoning, and he just like engineers a definition based on that general characteristic. In that sense, it might not be correct to call it proprietary. Maybe it's not like a very technical or standard definition you might find. I might grant that. That could be something.
Okay. How about this? How about this? Do you think that he's wrong, given like the first line of that SCP, excerpt that I showed you?
Yeah, if all that's saying is that it defines an inductive inference as an inference that's invalid, then sure. If that's what the definition is saying. That's like trivial. That's like asking me.
Debate in philosophy.
That's like asking me. Do you think somebody's wrong in saying that an invalid argument can be valid? Like obviously, yeah. I mean, obviously, somebody. If that was the view, yeah, of course. But that's like trivial.
So do you think he tried to characterize? He surveyed the landscape of inductive arguments, right? And just didn't notice that part. He just didn't notice that they're invalid, and so decided that I'm going to go with a concept of induction where they are valid arguments. Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
I don't know. Wait, sorry. What's the question here? You're asking me.
The question is, what the fuck are you talking about?
Okay, so are you like? I mean, you can ask the troll question, or you can ask the question
you're literally just you're proposing like a Frankenstein scenario.
Are you gonna repeat the question?
What he said?
I'm not look. I'm not interested in the kind of look. What was the first question you had earlier before you started, derailing into the troll nonsense?
You're not trying to understand anything I've said.
Sorry, what was the first question you asked earlier before you started derailing into the trolling?
Look, I've explicated in detail, right, why he's either mistaken or confused.
Did you want me to answer your question?
Oh, did you want me to finish talking, Nathan?
I mean, you were asking a question earlier, then I was like, wait, I didn't hear the question. What was it? And then you started rambling.
I didn't ask you a question. Right?
You did ask me a question. Then first you asked me some question. The question was really vague, really poorly put out. Then you said the question was, "What the fuck are you talking about?" in a troll manner. Yeah, and I was wondering what the original question is.
There wasn't an original question.
Yes, there was. You're just not tracking. You're just not tracking what you're saying. You asked me some question, and I was like, "Wait a second, that question was kind of vague. What were you asking there?" And then you said the question is, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
Okay.
In a troll manner.
Listen to me, dude.
And I was asking for the original question.
Wait, hold on. Are you going to have to keep talking to prevent me from talking, or what? Right?
Well, I just want to know what the original question was, or you can just say you don't want to ask it anymore.
I've given you an explanation of this confusion for a long time now. I've said quite a bit about what the differences are between induction and deduction, right? And I've given you quite a bit on why AY is either confused or just wrong. All right,
just tell me when you're done.
Right? Now, yeah, I will tell you when I'm done, right? I've given you a ton of information, right, about this issue, right? And you came to me with a cockamamie hypothesis that AY has conceptually engineered a new notion of induction, right, that's completely idiosyncratic, that he hasn't told anybody about.
I didn't grant it's idiosyncratic, by the way.
This is your defense of the things he's saying, right?
That's a straw man. That's a straw man. That's a straw man.
Non-deductive arguments. He's repeatedly said this, right? And you're trying to defend it by saying he has some obscure
That's a straw man. I didn't grant it was idiosyncratic.
It's not a straw man. It's exactly what
okay, look, said. Yeah. So I'll just go back to what I was asking earlier. Right now, there's some question you're asking me, and then after you asked that question, you proceeded to ask the troll question. And all I'm asking you right now, Sully, is did you actually want an answer to that question? And if so, just repeat that question. Or if you just want to move on and sort of ignore the question you were asking earlier, that's also fine.
Mason,
so did you want to repeat that question, or did you want to go on to something else?
Right?
No, I'm not being. Look, the reason why I think it's important is because you kind of go all over the place here. Like, I'm trying really carefully just to keep you in line, but you keep like diverting to different things. You aren't focused. Yeah, okay, now, if you don't want to ask that question, we can move on to the next one.
Just go fuck yourself. It's fine. If you think I'm going to talk to you and you comport yourself this way with me, you can go fuck yourself.
I'm not concerned with whether you want to talk to me or not. I'm concerned with hearing the question.
Good, then shut the fuck up.
The question that you asked, and then you proceeded to, follow up with a troll question.
I asked. You're not concerned about
being immature in the discussion.
You're not listening, and you're trying to score debate bro points with me. And if you think I don't,
I'm trying to hear the question you were asking earlier.
Yeah. Okay.
Did you not want an answer to it? Oh, and by the way, to be clear, of course, you were strawmanning when I said it. When you said I was granting it was idiosyncratic, I'm not granting that.
Hey, Detroit, do you think that it would be idiosyncratic if somebody said that induction can be translated without changing what kind of inference is being made, by the way, right, to a non-ampliative inference? Thank you.
I guess the problem is just like I don't know why it's a problem to translate it and lose the fact that it's ampliative. Like I said, it just seems like any reason you would give to defend the original inference can be applied to the non-ampliative inference. So I'm just like not sure what the problem is supposed to be there, but
I mean, I told you why like 3 or 4 times now.
well, you said one thing you said was that it loses the fact that it's ampliative. The other thing you said was it's a different inference. And then besides that, those two things which I both grant, I don't think I heard another reason why, but
I mean, I just told you this like 6 times, right? So there's a dialectical context going on, right? You say, why do you believe something? Right? I say, well, I believe it on the basis of an inductive inference. Right? You say, no, I don't accept those. I don't accept inferences where the premises don't necessitate the conclusion. I don't accept that, right? You have to defend a deductive inference, right? They demand that I defend a different inference than the one on the basis of which I actually hold the belief, right? And you think that's not illicit in a dialectical context. So that's an issue, right? That's one. Oh, you want to go ahead? Respond to that.
okay, yeah. I mean, it just seems like I said, like whatever reason they would give to defend the first one could also be applied to the second one. And by the way, if they're committed to the conclusion of the induction, right, then they're also going to be committed to the conclusion of the non-ampliative induction formulated deductively.
You're just saying the conclusion is the same conclusion. That's all you're saying.
Yeah, pretty much.
Obviously.
But like, do you agree that whatever reason you give to defend the first one can be applied to the second one?
No, not in most cases, because you're defending the premises, right? You have to give. Okay, let me ask you this, right? If I give you modus ponens, is it okay if I only defend premise 2? Right? I don't give you any reasons for premise 1. Is that fine with you?
Well,
or do you think that the reasons for premise 2 just are the reasons for premise 1? Like, if I give you the reasons for premise 2, have I justified premise 1?
Not necessarily.
Okay, then that's the answer to your question, obviously.
Well, wait, but no, the point is like whatever reason you give for the first one can be applied to the second one, not if you defend.
Are you not understanding? Like, are you not understanding what I just said?
I understood what you just said.
Look at the arguments I posted, right? So the second argument, right? The premise in that argument is premise 2 of the third argument, right?
Okay.
And I'm asking you, like, if you think if I justify premise 2, have I justified premise 1?
No.
Of the third argument. Right. Okay. So now if I justify premise 1 of the second argument, right, you understand how I've given fewer reasons, right, than I had to for the third argument.
Wait, sorry. You've justified premise 2 of the second argument? The second argument has one premise.
No, the first premise, the only premise. Look. Oh my god. That argument, the second argument, right, the premise of that argument is premise 2 of the third argument.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, and I asked you, in the case of the third argument, if I justify premise 2, have I justified premise 1?
No. But
exactly.
Presumably...
Now, for argument 2, right, if I justify that premise, right, that's the same as justifying premise 2 in the third argument, right?
Listen, yeah, I agree, but I didn't
Same
say
premise.
any justification of a premise in the in the
You're
ampliative
asking
form.
me if the reasons would be the same, right?
Yeah, I'm saying any reason you can find to justify the first one would also apply to justifying the second one. And that's just not interacting with what I
Oh
said,
my god.
because if
Oh my
you
god, dude.
justify the premise of the ampliative one, you're also justifying the premise of the non-ampliative one.
You
And
are so dishonest.
additionally, if you
It's like it's
justify the
unbelievable how
inference.
dishonest you are. Like it's
What?
crazy.
Wait, what?
You're
I'm
asking
literally.
if the
I don't
reasons
even
would be the
know.
same. Obviously, if I have to defend the third argument, right, it's incumbent on me to provide more reasons than it is to defend the second argument.
Well, I didn't say. Okay, well, first of all, you also have to defend in the ampliative form the idea that, like, the ampliative inference goes through, kind of, right? I mean,
Look,
like,
in the second case, I have
presumably,
to
if you
give you
have
premises that
ampliative
necessitate the
inference.
conclusion, and in the inductive case, I don't. Right, so it's clear that I have less to defend. Like I don't. It's crazy, like that you think this. Like it's just like you're either just literally trolling me, like you're being dishonest and trolling me, or like you're I don't know.
Listen, do we think that if the ampliative inference goes through, then the non-ampliative one goes through?
No,
No? Okay, how's that?
obviously not. What do you mean goes through? Do you just mean that like if these two things are true, then the third argument is sound?
Yeah.
That's not the same as saying it goes through.
What do you mean by goes through? That's all I meant is just that the premise is true, the conclusion is true, and like the ampliative inference is kind of like
The point is
justifying,
that
right?
look, the point is that if second premise of the third argument is true and the conclusion is true, then obviously that entails the first premise is true, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not the inference.
Okay. Yeah, it's a different inference. But wait, I
Right.
just have a question.
I don't.
I have a question. So, do you agree that when I'm giving an ampliative inference, there's also this kind of thing where, like, you kind of have to justify that it's like a useful or like a powerful kind of ampliative inference, maybe you could say. Like, if I have an inductive argument with like one case and the conclusion is like all of the population has the same sort of property that the one case has, you agree that is not really going to be like powerful, right?
Like inductively strong.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you just asking me if I think that there are like weak and strong inductive arguments? Is that all you're asking? Yes.
Yeah, and so presumably, if you think that the ampliative one is strong, then that's going to be a sort of justification for, well, not necessarily a justification, but a reason why you believe the first premise of the deductive version.
That would just be question begging.
Sorry, what would be question begging?
Question begging?
You're saying if I think the ampliative inference, if I use the ampliative inference, right, as support for the first premise, right? As in, like, we're accepting the ampliative inference, and then I'm saying that's justification for premise one, right? Then I've already accepted the conclusion of the third argument. So that's why it's question begging. I don't understand why that's confusing to you guys. Like,
I'm expressing the sort of thing that we went over the other time in VC, where it's like if your credence in the premise of the ampliative argument raises your credence in the conclusion.
Weren't we just talking about plausibility? Is that the conversation you're talking about?
I'm talking about your credence in the premise versus credence in the conclusion. I don't know if that answers your question. I don't remember talking about plausibility, but whatever. So all I'm saying is, if you have this sort of thing where you think belief in the first premise raises your credence in the second or in the conclusion, then that is just going to explain why you believe premise one of the deductive argument.
Wait a minute. What? Well, hold on. Which argument are you talking about when you say what's raising the credence here? You've already accepted the second argument?
No, just okay. Listen. So I'm saying, if your credence in the if your belief in the first premise of the ampliative inference, which is argument 2, raises your credence in the conclusion, then that is also going to explain why you believe premise 1 of the deductive argument. Like, it's going to be a sort of like reason to believe.
So you're saying you've accepted argument 2 first.
I'm not saying accepted. I'm just saying that.
Why is it raising your credence in anything then?
What do you mean? You can accept the premise and not accept the conclusion.
Which
that's the
premise?
whole point of.
So
that's
okay,
the whole
okay,
point.
but that's premise 2. But that's premise 2 of the third argument. How does premise 2 raise your credence in premise 1?
No. So listen again. I'll say this again. So I'm saying if your belief in the first premise of the ampliative inference raises your credence in the conclusion.
That's the second premise of the deductive inference, right?
Yeah, but I'm not done yet. Then that's a sort of explanation for why you believe the first premise, right? Because we already explained how that is sort of a reason to believe the material conditional.
No, right? Because if you're defending you're defending argument 3, right? And you say, well, premise 2, right? Premise 2, which is the premise in the inductive argument 2, right? That's the only premise in that argument, right? That's the premise you're talking about, okay? You're saying premise 2 raises your credence in premise 1, and that's just not right. Why would that happen?
No, listen, right? You could not believe premise 1 of the ampliative argument and also premise 2 of the deductive argument, and this could still be the case. It's just about whether you have this sort of probability raising thing going on between the premise and the conclusion of the ampliative argument. All I'm saying is that explains why you might believe the material conditional in the third/deductive argument. And that's what I explained the other day.
Let me get this straight. So here's what it sounds like you're saying. It sounds like you're saying you will accept the inductive argument when I offer it as a justification for premise 1. That's what it sounds like you're saying. So you correct me if that's wrong.
That is not what I'm saying, right? Do you understand what I mean by there's a credence raising sort of thing going on between the premise and the conclusion of the ampliative argument?
If you accept that, wait, hold on. Are you just saying that, look, you're just saying you're going to defend premise 1 of the third argument, the non-ampliative. You're going to defend that by saying that P raises the probability of Q.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Right.
That's
now,
exactly right.
Hold on. So if I just give you the third argument, right, and I say, I'm going to defend premise 2, and my defense of premise 1 is that premise 2 raises my credence in premise 1. Would you accept that?
Well, it's not that premise 2 raises your credence in premise 1. Again, That's
exactly what you're saying, though.
No,
it's the same premise. It's the same proposition.
Premise 2 isn't the same thing as saying that your belief in premise 2 raises your credence in
oh my god.
The conclusion of the material conditional.
You're saying that it raises premise 2 is being established and justified, right? So we accept the antecedent of the conditional is true because we've accepted premise 2, right? And you want to say that like the reason to accept the material conditional, right? Which is only going to be true if Q is also true now that we've accepted premise 2, right? You want to say that the reason for accepting the material conditional is premise 2 because that raises the probability of Q.
I mean, you might be able to phrase it like that. Sure, I'm not sure if I completely understand your phrasing, but that sounds roughly what I'm saying. Yeah. And the point is just if you think the premise of the ampliative argument raises your credence in, or if the ampliative argument's premise raises your credence in the conclusion, then that's just to say like it's a strong inductive inference, basically, or not necessarily strong, but like it has some inductive strength.
But then you're just accepting the ampliative inference. I don't understand this, right? Like if you start with the principle of indifference on the conclusion.
No, you don't have to accept it. You don't even have to accept it for this.
Why wouldn't you be accepting it? You have to start with a lower
like it doesn't raise your credence enough. You could say it doesn't raise your credence enough or something like that.
If you're at 50, right, then anything is enough.
Yeah, but you may not be at 50, right? I mean.
Yeah, that's about the prior, right?
Look, if I can just rephrase this in a way, because I'm like having trouble sort of getting this out clearly, but I'll try and make it clear, I guess. So, like one of the things about the ampliative inference is supposed to be that the premise raises your credence in the conclusion, right? I mean, do you agree with that? Like that's kind of part of the point of being an ampliative inference.
Yes, I'm granting
Okay,
that.
sure.
I don't understand why that's.
If that's the case, then that also is sort of an explanation for why you believe in the material conditional, right?
That's to accept the inductive inference. right? That's to say, like, accepting the inductive inference is just to say, the premise gives you reason to accept the conclusion.
Okay, so then
ask yourself is saying, I don't accept inferences like that.
Now
So how could
saying,
that raise? Yeah. Listen. If he's saying I don't accept inferences like that, how can that raise his credence?
Wait, well, there's a difference between accepting that it's probability raising and that the premise is true versus accepting it in the context of when somebody gives you an argument that's in that form, you're gonna like roll with it in the dialogue, kind of, right?
Look, again, if you're accepting the principles of induction, then you're just accepting that the premise there is not guaranteeing that the conclusion is true. Right? That's the point. You're accepting that the premise could be true and yet the conclusion false. And so what we mean when we say we accept it is we've accepted that it has given us reason, right, to think the conclusion is true.
Okay.
So I don't understand how you could say, like, okay, I'll accept the inductive argument in support of premise one, but I won't accept it unless you give me the deductive argument first, right? It's a massive waste of time. That's the best that can be said about it.
Not exactly what's being said. What's being said is that if you have the deductive argument, the same sort of reason that you believe the ampliative argument goes through can also just be applied to explain why you believe premise one. And then there's direct parity between the premise of the ampliative argument and the second premise. So basically, both premises of the deductive argument correspond to reasons why you believe the ampliative inference goes through.
But you understand that even if somebody says, like, if I just said, if P then Q, right? Like, let's say I say, let's see. If I'm running, then the weather is nice, right? Something like that, right? Like, something to actually model the fact that we want to say it's probability raising but not guaranteeing, right? The point is that that's actually not really a good justification for the conditional, right? If somebody doesn't accept the conclusion, they're just still going to reject the conditional for exactly the same sort of reasons you're bringing up about credences, So, like, let's say you start with a really low prior on the conclusion, right? And I say, well, P raises the probability of Q a little bit, right? You're like, no, the conditional is still false, right? Like,
yeah, then you just won't accept the ampliative inference either.
No, but look, you can still accept the inference, right? Like, because again, the point is to say, this gives me reasons to accept the conclusion. Now, I could still have other reasons to reject the conclusion, right? But I'm still going to accept that argument. Right?
But the conclusion of the ampliative inference isn't premise gives me reason to believe X. The conclusion is X.
Right.
Okay, all right. So, okay, that's fine. If you want to say, like, I maintain the conclusion is false, and then so therefore I'm not accepting the argument, right?
Okay, I'm just curious whether you're tracking what I'm saying when I say that both premises of the deductive argument correspond to reasons why you believe the ampliative inference goes through.
No, I don't agree with you there.
Okay, so I can explain again. So we agree.
The point there is that I don't think that the ampliative reasoning goes through because I accept the material condition, right? That's not the reason. That's not one of the reasons why I accept it.
Well,
in fact, like I said before,
it is a reason. I said it corresponds to, and the point is that the same sort of justification can be used for both. Like, if you justify one, you justify the other, basically.
Didn't we just go over this?
What is this?
I thought we just went over this about how the justifications aren't the same. I don't know where to go from here, to be honest.
Wait, so I'll just
it just seems like
I'll ask for.
It seems like you're not really. No, look. I really think you need to do a little bit more thinking about this, to be honest with you, right? Because you keep trying to ask me questions, and you're not actually willing to budge on whether you might be wrong about what you're saying.
I don't even know what like the contention at this point really is. Like, I mean, I know there's something like you think that it's unreasonable to ask to put.
I think any reasonable person who listened to this conversation would like understand what the issue is. And so this gaslighting shit does not work on me, okay?
Okay, just like I don't understand why like you're getting mad. I'm not like
Oh
I'm
well, I'm
trying
not
to
getting mad
understand
at
what you're
you.
saying.
I
I
got
just
mad at
don't think you've
Mason.
presented
Right?
any good reason why it's a problem yet. That's all I'm saying.
That's fine, right? And I think no matter what I say to you, you're gonna keep saying that, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, fine. Maybe I mean, okay, just if you think that, then I mean, it's probably not worth engaging with me then. But I don't know why you would think like I don't have some sort of dogmatic commitment to defending everything AY says or something like that. But whatever.
I didn't say that. I'm literally only going off of the way you and Mason have comported yourself in this conversation.
Wait,
Like, I'm
Mason.
totally willing to talk to you guys. I've had many like polite conversations with you, right?
Yeah. Okay, wait, I'm just curious, Mason, do you kind of understand what I'm saying with the premises correspond with reasons why you would accept the ampliative inference?
I'll try to characterize it. So, roughly, you're saying that the only reason you would believe when we have the original ampliative argument, somebody might, think that that argument is inductively strong, and you're saying that one thing or something that might plausibly explain why they believe that that argument is inductively strong is because is either is or corresponds to somebody believing in that premise one of the deduction.
Yeah, that's right. And it's because the premise, like presumably the premise raises your credence in the conclusion of the ampliative inference, which also would just give you a higher credence in premise one of the deductive inference, given the antecedent that is, which is just premise two. And then obviously premise two is just the same as the premise of the ampliative inference.